The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
All right, welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I am the host, Andy Steele, and today we're going to be talking about an article. I don't know how well you see it behind me, but it says Special Service Declassified Guantanamo Court Filings Suggest some 9/11 hijackers were CIA agents. And this is not directly related to the controlled demolition evidence, but anytime new information comes out about September 11th, and it's getting mainstream attention. This is not just out of Russia Today, but there's other mainstream articles that are talking about this. It lends credence to what we are talking about. Anytime 9/11 is questioned and there's solid facts, I'm not talking about just whatever people throw out there on the internet, but that throws the whole narrative in question. It shines a spotlight back to the controlled demolitions, which is easily proven with science, as we've been talking about it for years. So today we're going to be joined by a great guest to talk about this subject. This is Ray McGinnis. He's been on before. He is the author of Unanswered Questions: What the September 11th Families Asked and the 9/11 Commission Ignored. Got a great episode in our archives where he goes over the contents of that book. He holds a BA in Religious Studies from the University of Toronto and a diploma in Christian Education from the Center for Christian Studies. He has served as national staff for youth and young adult ministries with the United Church of Canada, and he really knows his stuff when it comes to 9/11. So let's go ahead and bring him in here. Ray, welcome back to 9/11 Freefall.
Good to see you, Andy. Good to be with you.
All right, so I don't follow the geopolitical stuff as closely as I do the science. I love facts. I love things that I can point to that people universally understand. But after my whole spiel I just gave, you can understand why we want to invite you on to talk about this. It was a big buzz in the 9/11 Truth movement a few weeks ago, and we should at least mention it. So I've been studying this article from RT, so we're going to talk a lot rehashing some of it. But I'm going to ask for some of your insights on some of these things, because it's just shocking to learn about how our government works. It's not like high school social studies class taught you. And I think Americans have a right to know exactly what is supposed to be protecting them, what is supposed to be looking out for the interests of them, because it doesn't seem like they are. Let's talk about first laying this out, how this info actually came to the public knowledge. The Guantanamo Bay Commission and its lead investor, Don, if I pronounce this right, Canestraro, and it was his own personal probe of the Saudi government involvement in the 9/11 attacks, conducted at the request of the defendant's lawyers. But I'll let you talk about it. So, Ray, take it away.
So we have these Saudi guys, these people are still in Guantanamo all these years, and they want to show that there's government involvement in the whole plot, and so saying, like why are we still here in Guantanamo Bay if people were moving pawns around the chessboard, hijackers, fast-tracked with Visa Express programs, with the CIA telling people in the State Department and in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, no, these people, even though they answer when they say, what year were you born on the form, 1878, when someone else answers a question on the visa form, what is the reason for you going to the United States? Answer, no. So, all of these are huge red flags. And the Family Steering Committee for the 9/11 Independent Commission, all the people like Lori Van Auken and Kristen Breitweiser, all these people had questions about, the story that's breaking now resembles a lot of information that's come out over the years. So it's new in terms of this particular, but we've been hearing about Station Alec and other things over the years, and some of the families, wanted questions about stuff that is like this, even in the 9/11 Commission. But yes, this takes it one more step. It makes me wonder about, are they CIA assets? Are they CIA agents? I can't say for sure.
Well, yeah, and it's funny how in the years after September 11th, obviously all you heard about was the war on terror. Everything was an update regarding that. Usually some kind of step towards war to get people hepped up for it, to make people think that the boogeyman's hiding under their bed and going to get them. We're going to have another big attack. And then it seemed to level off. Sometime around the election of Obama, the left went to sleep. After all of the anti-war protests, and it was kind of interesting because the right people on the right who were against Bush, sort of the Ron Paul folks and everything, and the left were all united. Remember those days? Those were beautiful days. And then Obama came in and was like, hey, we did our job. This is great. It's all continuing, and the drone strikes are, drone striking children in Pakistan. But whatever, it's Obama. So we're just going to sort of disappear and not emerge again until Trump gets elected. But you don't hear about this, and it's kind of interesting because it's still going on. We've still got these people at Guantanamo Bay. We've still got judicial action going on related to them, and things are coming out as a result. And even though this got some mainstream media coverage, you don't hear about it as much. It's not like it's screamed across the front pages of every major newspaper in the country or the world or all over the cable news. They're probably still talking about the upcoming election and whatnot. It's sort of like a back page story, but again, this was 9/11, the biggest attack on our soil in the history of this country, and anytime new stuff comes out, it ought to be at least to have its time in the sun. All right, so let's lay it out for the audience here. The stars here are two guys. I'm going to have to look at my notes to say these names. Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midar. Apparently they were flagged as potential members of Al-Qaeda prior to entering the United States, yet they were allowed in. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so these guys were they went off to San Diego, and there was an FBI informant that was, very, very cozy with them. I think they were living with him. Right?
He set them up for an apartment.
He set them up in the apartment. And there's also a Saudi intelligence agent that may also be working with the CIA that's also very cozy with these people. And they're also going to things like nude club, strip bars, nude clubs, so on. They got passes to SeaWorld. And you got the story. On the one hand, I remember Richard Clark, who's in this other video that you sent me with Jason Burmis. Richard Clark would say later in his, in 2004 that it was only in like the 21st of August 2001 that anyone in the FBI had any idea that who these guys were. But it's very clear that there was that there were people. The FBI informant isn't going to be kind of sitting going, oh, I have no idea who these people are. So it I think that there's. It's so problematic, and also these guys, I think, were also people. When they eventually were involved in any flight schools, that the person who they said they wanted to fly Boeings, and the flight instructor said, forget it, you guys. He described them as being, quote, clueless. We've got all kinds of hijackers who apparently are can't find the sandwich in the paper bag. So it's these kind of stories are dribbled out in the news, and it's a really interesting picture of clueless hijackers, We're meant to believe over all these years that whenever these stories pop up, that the CIA was like the Keystone Cops, the FBI was like the Keystone Cops, and the State Department, and so on. Nobody could figure out. They're just always like one step away from catching the person. And yet, I mean, like I'll just read something from my book, Unanswered Questions, regarding the CIA. I mean, you've got George Tenet is in charge of the CIA, and at 8:50 a.m. on the day of the attacks, before 4 minutes after the North Tower was hit, he's having breakfast at the St. Regis Hotel with his mentor, former Oklahoma Senator David Boren. And Boren reportedly asked Tenet, "What are you worried about these days?" And Tenet says, "Bin Laden. Something big is going to happen. You don't understand what the capabilities of these people and what their reach and what they're putting together." And then Tenet, 4 minutes after the crash of the North Tower, gets a phone call from CIA headquarters, and immediately he says, "This has been Bin Laden's fingerprints all over it." And yet, with his sense, this prescient sense of knowing at that very moment, before why would anyone know anything 4 minutes after the first tower has been hit and people are thinking, oh, there's just some strange plane that went off course. There's no initiative to phone the Port Authority to get anybody to evacuate the building because the CIA director is 100% certain that there's a terrorist attack. And you've got people like the former CIA agent Michael Schur, who heads the Alec Station, and he talks about how Tenet, on 10 separate occasions, the unit was provided key policymakers with information that could have led to the killing or capture of Osama bin Laden. In each of those 10 instances, the senior policymaker in charge, whether it was Sandy Berger, Richard Clarke, or George Tenet, resisted taking action. And I want to say one thing about that, because I listened to the interview with or the commentary by Jason Burmis, and you're listening to Richard Clarke talk about pointing us in the direction that the CIA is involved in stopping us from connecting the dots. And yes, George Tenet probably 6 or 7 times personally said no CIA agents, even though you think you can get bin Laden or capture him, I'm vetoing this plan. But at the very same time, Richard Clarke is very cozy with the royals in the United Arab Emirates, and he personally is involved in putting the kibosh on 2 CIA operative plans to capture bin Laden as well. So it's kind of like, I've got the puck right now. I'm going to blame it on the CIA, says Richard Clarke. And then George Tenet is kind of doing the same, like he's also involved in preventing these captures. And so, they're all taking turns blaming other departments and also pretending that different departments didn't know anything. And I want to add one more thing about all these different people. Like at one point, like I might think, Richard Clarke testified before the 9/11 Commission, and he said, I failed you, your government failed you. And I remember listening to that and thinking, oh, maybe he's a good guy. Maybe he's somebody who we can say, okay, at least here's someone who's credible or trustworthy. But then you find he's doing all this other stuff to sort of, prevent capture of bin Laden, the purported enemy of America and the terrorist world. And then you've got, at one point, Clarke also talks about, in 1998, he's involved in a terrorist, counterterrorism tabletop exercise in Washington, D.C., and he talks about, there's going to, I just have a feeling that there's going to be an attack on Washington, D.C. and New York City. It just happens to be 3 years before that. And then Michael Schur, who's, who I might think, okay, he's complaining about people who are preventing him and his station from getting bin Laden and so on. And yet he's also someone on record who's also talked about, several years before the attacks, he's saying to Richard Clarke, what's it going to take before we really get these terrorists? An attack on the Pentagon? I mean, they're just so prescient. Their prediction power is years ahead. So, I find myself, as I read this new information, it reminds me of other things that have come out and been dribbled, and it kind of fits it more firmly in the puzzle piece. But all the people that are exploring or explaining things to maybe make me think that yes, something's afoot, they're also all somehow complicit in these predictive powers of an attack by Al Qaeda, or preventing their own agents in the FBI or the CIA from getting these guys. So I feel like we're all being played all the time.
Well, there's some accusations made in these documents that came out, where the unredacted versions were leaked on the net. Now, the RT article I read mentioned that these guys, and I'm going to repeat their names, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midhar, but they attended an al-Qaeda summit in Kuala Lumpur just days before entering the United States. Now, look, I have a big yardstick for how I want people to be handled. I don't want to see people discriminated against just because they come from a certain country or whatnot. But considering the trouble I've seen other people, just people in the United States, Americans going to Canada years ago to cover, it was either the G8 or G20, I can't remember, but it was some big summit where protesters were going, and the guys from We Are Change were going down there. They were turned away. I got turned away. They searched my car, held me for 3 hours, told me not to come back just for trying to come down there. They found a bandana in my back seat. I just wear that because in the morning my hair is sticking up or whatever. I wasn't planning to do any vandalism or anything. I just wanted to cover it for my website at the time. But, that they're banning in Canada journalists from coming down and covering a summit with world leaders. So, considering that countries, supposedly free countries, are doing these things, we have these guys who are attending, apparently Al-Qaeda has summits, a summit by these terrorists that are being watched a few days before, and they're being let in. Shouldn't attendance at an Al-Qaeda summit be a huge red flag?
Of course it should. Again and again, we have, later on, al-Hazmi, the Washington Post report, al-Hazmi and al-Midhar and 4 other of the alleged hijackers at one point were living, working, planning, and developing all of their activities near the NSA's headquarters in Laurel, Maryland, months before the 9/11 attack. So, from the moment they get into the USA and all the way along, there's all kinds of. They've got FBI informants or Saudi intelligence agents that connect to the CIA. They're right near the NSA headquarters. Others of them are near military bases in Florida, it strains credulity to believe that everybody's always dropping the ball, always failing to connect the dots. The story of incompetence that we're asked to believe, it's unbelievable.
Now, I hear some skeptics out there. I hear it psychically through the through the camera saying, well, the CIA didn't know that they had attended this Al-Qaeda summit. No, they asked the Malaysian authorities to document it. They knew about it. They knew about it down there. These guys had attended, and yet they were still allowed in. Here's what gets me too. High school social studies. We assume all these agencies are, even though they have different missions, different spheres of operation, that CIA handles outside threats, FBI handles inside threats. Even though they all do different things, they're all working under the executive branch of the United States and working together for the safety and protection of America. However, that's not really the case, because they're competitive and they keep things from each other and they act against each other. And in this particular case, the CIA didn't inform the FBI that these guys were here and blocked, apparently, some FBI representatives at this Alec Station from reporting it to their superiors until at least late of August 2001. And there's more on that we'll get into, because this gets deeper and deeper down the road. But what's your thoughts on that? Not telling the FBI, which is in charge of, supposedly, protecting us here on the homeland for the interstate crimes and such, that at least these guys are here, and maybe they'll stir up some trouble. Who knows?
Well, there are problems with. I mean, the CIA director George Tenet also had very close. He was doing. He was working. His relationship with different people in Saudi intelligence and the Saudi royal family. Tenet was also shielding or preventing his own CIA officers from finding out what Tenet was doing, which was to make sure that the CIA officers didn't know anything about connections with the Saudi government and Arab extremism and Al Qaeda. So you've got both the CIA apparently preventing FBI agents or some FBI agents from knowing something about who's in sleeper cells, hijackers coming into the USA. And you've also have people at the top, the director of the CIA, preventing other CIA agents from knowing what's going on. So, who benefits from all of this preventing, preventing plots of capturing bin Laden, preventing agents within the department or interdepartmentally from knowing what's going on?
Yeah, and in high school social studies, everybody thinks that everybody within a particular group, or in this case agencies, are all working in lockstep with each other like a well-oiled machine. But the truth is, agencies, organizations of any kind are full of people. People often have their own agendas. People are pulling their own little side, cons and whatnot. And people even within groups can be working against each other or just for their own interests and hiding it from their team members involved. So, I'm not directly relating those words to this. I'm just saying that's what goes on. So this isn't that far-fetched to think that somebody is keeping the rest of his underlings or team or whatever you want to call it in the dark on these things. Sorry, and I interrupted you, so please continue.
Yeah, well, I think that yes, you've got this person who's come out with the stuff in Guantanamo, and you've got these people. I always have to remember their names too. Al Hazmi and Al Midar, because I find, frankly, whenever I'm talking about all the 19 hijackers and their first names and surnames, I get all scrambled, and so it's just like when you have this repeated pattern of not connecting the dots. I think that it's. I think that there's so many dots that weren't connected when it comes to 9/11 and the elusive hijackers. I remember listening to the testimony of Mindy Kleinberg, whose husband Alan died in North Tower, and she testified before the 9/11 Commission. And she talked about how people say that the hijackers only have to get lucky once, but people that working in the government have to work hard. You can't prevent one lucky, but the hijackers weren't lucky once. They were lucky over and over and over and over and over again. And I think that with what's happening with this new information that's come out, it again. There should be a public discussion about. We don't like to think that agencies that are there to serve and protect us might also have other things that in mind. Now, I'm going to give you a Canadian example of something which happened in my own province of British Columbia. We had a couple of people who were on welfare, who mental health issues, drugs in the Vancouver area, who ended up having Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers coaching them to think it would be a good idea bomb the legislative buildings of the province of British Columbia in Victoria on Canada Day, July 1st, 2013. The case was eventually thrown out of court in 2017 or 18, and it was discovered that there were as many as 240 RCMP officers that were all involved in this entrapment. All of our Canadian taxpaying dollars going towards creating a terrorist event. I mean, these two people were completely unable to do anything, and were kind of like being moved along. So, as a Canadian citizen, my idea of having the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they're supposed to protect us from plots, not to help create them. So it's something that we don't want to think about, but I think that we have to ask, does the CIA get involved in moving things along to increase their budget or other things? Is all of this inability to prevent the hijackers from getting visas, fast track to the USA, all the little steps along the way, these guys, being so close to the NSA headquarters for a number of months earlier in 2001, or being in San Diego with the FBI informant and other people that are connected to the Saudi and CIA intelligence. I think that we have to ask too: are there other things, other agendas going on?
Right. Well, government is a story of many agendas going on, because that's supposed to be the nature of democratic governments, right? I mean, you have Republicans and Democrats, and people, they have their own ideas about what they want to do. And so we're supposed to have different agendas going on legally and using the political process and winning elections and such, but you can't have people who are in charge of the security of the United States trying to push either a personal agenda or to make money or whatever it was about, or working for other governments, who knows. But you can't have that. You have to be working as a team. You got to work to keep the peace going, and of course this is problematic. And now you mentioned it slightly earlier, but we've had Mr. Springman here on the show talking about his story. Briefly remind our audience about that, because this sort of goes along with what he's reported from his experience.
Well, Michael Springman was in the embassy. Is that remembering right, in Saudi Arabia, and he was pointing out that you've got these people who are being put forward to fast track in the Visa Express program, and he's saying, these people don't have they're not filling out the forms, they don't have the credentials, and so and he's trying to blow the whistle on what's going on, but I think he's being overruled by people in the CIA and the adjacent to the embassy. So off go the hijackers. 15 of the 19 go off to America, notwithstanding his objections.
Well, it's still important, even if you're in some kind of, I don't want to call it middle management, I don't know what you call it, but if you're in some position where you're not at the very top, but you're not necessarily at the very bottom, so you see some stuff. If you see something, say something, no matter what the consequences are, because you don't know what the result is going to be a few weeks later or a few months later, and you got to live with yourself at the end of your life, and it's better to blow the whistle if you can. I
want to add one other thing that's kind of related to all that was going on, like back then when these guys went to San Diego, like Richard Clarke again, was in the habit of failing to report information or act on information about Al-Qaeda operatives. 1 month before the meeting in Malaysia, after the Al-Qaeda Millennium Plot was broken up in Jordan, Richard Clarke authorized an investigation of one of the plotters named Khalil Deek, who lived in Anaheim, California. An investigative team reported to Clarke and the NSA directly in December 1999, stating that Deek's next-door neighbor was operating an Al-Qaeda sleeper cell in Anaheim. And what Clarke did with that information was no action taken. So I wonder I mean, Michael Springman's and other people are doing all the things they're supposed to be doing. There's other people who've been, I forget, the Colleen Rowley in Minneapolis, FBI agent trying to let people know about the 20th alleged hijacker and so on. And what happens so often with the stories we've heard for the last 2 decades is people in the field are doing what they're supposed to do to alert their superiors. And then their superiors, be it Richard Clark or George Tennant or someone else, maybe not quite so high up, decides to sit on the information. And it's a pattern that's all over the place, all over the map. So it makes me ask questions. I want to have, my wish would be that there could have been not just a 9/11 commission that with a whitewash, but that there could be, a real trial with real testimony, with cross-examination and discovery and perjury and all of that stuff.
And the thing is, with law enforcement, sometimes you do sit on things for a while because, you want to build a case against whoever the target is, or maybe you want to go after someone bigger in the cases of the mafia, rather than bust a small-time drug dealer. You follow him around for a bit, get his connections, and then figure out who's distributing it here in the United States and such, and wait for the big bust later on. But in this case, even if they were just monitoring these guys, which this gets more scandalous in just a few moments here, but let's just say they were just monitoring these guys, the bad thing happened, 9/11 happened, there needs to be full disclosure of why nobody acted upon this, and they aren't U.S. citizens. I mean, the whole purpose of these things is to prevent more tragedies and disasters from happening in the country, so this should at least be talked about. Now, there's this gentleman, I think we mentioned him before, Omar al-Bayoumi. He was a Saudi national living here in the United States. Basically set these guys up, got them an apartment, gave them some money. He was working for Saudi intelligence, according to this article, and now it's not just that he was a Saudi intelligence person, but according to this interview in these papers with an FBI person, and the person's name is referred to only as CS-23, the CIA was not only monitoring these 2 gentlemen who came in, but they were also trying to recruit them. Let's talk about that for a minute. They were trying to recruit these 2 guys that ended up, doing some very bad things here in the United States.
Yeah. So, well, if you have, if you have CIA agents trying to recruit these guys, well, that's a really big problem, because then you've got, the official account of what happened on September 11th is that America was blindsided. George W. Bush, nobody could have known, even though there were, multiple warnings from different countries regarding all kinds of things. But now you've got, in this story, we've got hijackers themselves were CIA agents or CIA assets, but whatever they are, their relationship is far too close. If not, on the payroll. We all know or should remember that Osama bin Laden, who went by the name of Tim Osman, who come to the States and in relationship to the Taliban, or to Al Qaeda fighting the Soviets in the Afghan War, was on the payroll of the CIA. So there's the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and if we want to find out who else is complicit and involved in the attacks of September 11th, maybe we should look under that tree called the CIA and find out what about that. What about these allegations, and why when there is this kind of information, declassified documents that are telling us. Maybe there's some other document that would say, no, you're wrong, and we'd have to go and see what that is. But assuming this document, it's the guy who's involved in this and declassifying this document is someone who's testified in court before and seen as very legitimate. So, so if we have CIA agents who were involved in piloting the planes on 9/11, then we don't have a situation where the government was blindsided by this, guy in a cave doing this amazing outsmarting of the U.S. military. We've got our own intelligence agency in America involved in a plot. So, I mean, that should be big news. I want to see this as I want to see the headline in the New York Times.
Yeah, CIA agents attacked America. But I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a second. This is going to get deeper as we go along. But just, I know there's people out there who don't like what we're doing at 9/11 Truth and in the greater 9/11 Truth movement, and they try to explain off everything. Sometimes they stretch their imaginations to its limit to try to explain off every little piece of information that comes out. And they might say, well, the CIA tried to recruit these guys, and these guys just ended up, turning or just, carrying out this plot, and the CIA had no clue, and so they made a mistake. They didn't expect them to go that far, but they went ahead and did this, and so that's really where the only error is. It's not like the CIA had anything to do with it. All right. Well, number one, still okay. Let's just say that's the case. I don't think it is based off of other stuff we're going to talk about. But let's say that's the case. First of all, there's a great danger in associating with bad people. I've known people who will talk about a friend that can do some, really sneaky bad stuff. Oh, they know how to hack Facebook and all of this stuff into people's accounts and everything. Well, that's all well and good, and it sounds all cute and funny and everything. But what if that person turns on you? This person who has all this knowledge and knows how to do these things, at some point that can all be turned on you. So it's just better not to associate with people who do shady things. That is a lesson in life. Because also, too, you get on their radar. You get on some weirdo's radar. Man, they can cause problems and and like they didn't know about you before, but now they do. So this needs to be discussed nationally, about dealing with these people. I understand sometimes you do have to recruit members of the enemy to infiltrate and turn and offer money and protection here in the United States. If they do that, it's all part of law enforcement. But this should be openly getting discussed, because from every story that I hear, you're talking about bin Laden, we're talking about these guys, they always seem to, the CIA always seems to fail. These people seem to turn and then pull off these things. But also, let's get back to these documents. There was another FBI person that was interviewed in these by this Canestraro person, the head of this commission, and is labeled just as CS-3. Yeah. And we're talking about Biomi now, who's setting up these guys in an apartment and giving them money and stuff. He asserted that Biomi, and I'm going to just quote it, setting up bank accounts and renting an apartment for the two hijackers in San Diego was done at the behest of the CIA. All right, any information provided to Biomi would then be fed back to Alec Station. So they know this guy's doing this with these people, yet they don't intervene. Any comments on that?
Well, I want to go back to the first cabinet meeting of the new administration of President George W. Bush in January of 2001. Paul O'Neill, the Treasury Secretary, wrote a memoir, and I'm forgetting the name of it. It came out in 2004. But he says in that memoir that when they had their first cabinet meeting, that basically after, I guess if they had a prayer, after the first the first order of business that the president set was basically, basically he wanted to go to war in Iraq. He wanted to finish the job that his dad started, and he wanted people around the cabinet table to talk about, ways to get America into Iraq. And you've got Rumsfeld apparently going on, giving us all the talking points about weapons of mass destruction and rogue nations, so on and so forth. George Tenet probably would be at that table. President Bush doesn't need to tell anyone anything more than, I think it'd be great if we could end up, in the next few years in a war in Iraq. There are people like Tenet that might have some ideas about how to move some pieces on the global stage so that they could get closer to that goal. I mean, in addition to the whole thing around Al Qaeda, the day after the attacks of September 11th, Donald Rumsfeld was saying reportedly in the news that Saddam Hussein was responsible for the attacks. Saddam Hussein was also responsible in some statements by Dick Cheney for the anthrax attack as well. So with all of this, stuff being done at the behest of the CIA, through one lens, this kind of behavior on the part of the CIA is helping the president move closer to his goal of getting into war in the Middle East, which he certainly did do in Afghanistan and Iraq in short order.
Right, the goal is supposed to be not to have a war. At least that's what I've always been taught. The purpose of any kind of law enforcement, whether it's the local sheriff to the FBI director, is to keep the peace. Then you keep the peace, you can have freedom and a nice working society. It also says in this article, CS3, this is the person from the FBI that was interviewed, felt it odd that this CIA unit, situated in the U.S. and staffed by analysts, was involved in recruiting al-Qaeda operatives. As such, work is typically the responsibility of case officers trained in covert operations based overseas. I guess this is another person. CS10 concurred that this arrangement was highly unusual and made it nearly impossible for Alec Station to develop informants inside of al-Qaeda from its base several thousands of miles from the country where al-Qaeda was suspected of operating. So you've got unusual processes happening. And I'm not going to pretend that I understand how the CIA operates on the from a day-to-day basis and all their protocols and such, but you got these two people testifying that there was unusual actions taking place here that made it difficult for them to do their jobs, which just adds more suspicion to this entire thing. What are your thoughts?
Well, it is suspicious. Why would you put people in charge of particular files, which are now going to undercut the work of other agents in other places overseas? It doesn't make any sense. Is not, again, the job of the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency is to prevent. Is to gather intelligence so as to prevent harm to Americans, and so they're hobbling. Maybe to say politely, they're hobbling their ability to keep the nation safe by thwarting the good work of others that are trying to intercede and prevent things from happening.
Right. Now, this really got me here. This is CS3-3 person from the FBI. Also said that the people in the Alec Station were told by the CIA not to cooperate fully with the joint inquiry. I don't know. Do we have any other information what not cooperate fully entailed? Like, what kind of information did they withhold? And maybe nobody knows, right? But you're trying to look into 9/11, the greatest mass murder in our country's history, and you have this testimony saying that they were told not to cooperate fully. How is this not illegal? If I don't cooperate with the police, a crime happens somewhere in my circle, where I have to deal with them, I could probably get in some trouble if I'm withholding evidence and such, but it seems that they are able to just get away with not cooperating. And, how is this that they're not investigating this further and making a big screaming deal out of it?
I think with both there was the joint congressional and Senate inquiry into the attacks, which preceded the 9/11 Commission, and the experience of both the joint inquiry and the 9/11 Commission was that the FBI was extremely uncooperative with the investigators. And so there was all kinds of information that would not be provided, all kinds of witnesses that were not allowed to be, to testify. In the 9/11 Commission case, you got 18 days of public hearings, but most of the testimony is already private behind closed doors. But even then, they wouldn't allow many people to say things. And when they did speak, you have witnesses from the FBI who maybe know something that they could say to the staff team of the 9/11 Commission. And they have a government minder, somebody who's senior official in the FBI, with sitting beside them or with their hand on their shoulder saying, or tapping their toe saying, no, don't answer that question. Or sometimes answering it for the witness. So there's an awful lot of the families and those who were watching the 9/11 Commission unfold. There was press releases about how you cannot have a proper investigation if witnesses are being intimidated, and that's what happened. So you've got both FBI officials pressing information, not providing it, and then when you have witnesses come forward that might be able to provide something, they're being intimidated by people who are right beside them, who could demote them.
Yeah, well, that's why it's important to not hold on to worldly things, and enjoy your career while you can. But if the moment of truth comes, step up and speak out and do what's right, because all that stuff doesn't make any difference after you're gone from this world. Philosophizing a little bit, but I think we'd have a better world if more people thought like that. It's just most people, if they got called to the IRS for an audit, would be quaking in their boots, scared that their lives are going to get disrupted horribly if they make some kind of mistake or don't disclose everything. People get prepared for audits, and or they pay the extra money to H&R Block and handle it for them if they are, because they want to make sure they cooperate and don't have the big boot step down on them. But these guys who are supposedly looking out for the interest of the United States, they try to figure out and scheme how to get away with things, how to not disclose fully what they need to in order to protect their secrets, and for some reason they just seem to be a different class of people from the rest of us, where they can get away with this.
I want to add one more thing too. Like, you've got this behavior by the FBI and the CIA. George Tenet was accused of lying under, when he was testifying before the 9/11 Commission. But then there's the behavior of the 9/11 Commission itself. Lee Hamilton in the forefront, who's the co-chair of the 9/11 Commission, throughout the investigation, didn't want to subpoena people. Didn't want to, so they don't want to, so not only have you got a reluctant agency saying, oh, we don't want to bring you any of these people forward, you also got a commission that's reluctant to subpoena the people, reluctant to go and get the documents. We don't want to play, Hamilton saying, we don't want to play hardball with, we want to be nice to the White House. And, well, you have to ask for the key people to come forward if an agency is reluctant. But so there, you've got the FBI and the CIA, among others, slow walking their response. You can, and sometimes the 9/11 Commission wouldn't even ask for things like, well, why don't you ask for the videos from the hotel and the gas station regarding what happened with the crash in the Pentagon? Oh, it would be kind of mean of us to ask for that information, so we won't bother asking. But the same kind of reluctance and trying to be nice and believing that surely there's nothing there to see under that rock goes on over and over again in terms of the 9/11 Commission's behavior. So it just becomes one bad thing after another in terms of how not to do an investigation.
Yeah, it's like these people who weaponize guilt or try to, surround themselves with a spongy membrane of polite chit chat and these beatific phrases about unifying and all this, just to cover up their own crappy behavior.
Yeah,
there's a lot of people in society who do that, but government uses it to an art.
Well, I think that, maybe for me to be 9/11 commissioner-esque at this moment, I want to say that's a nice suit jacket you're wearing today.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, that's the commission right there. Yeah, a bunch of backslapping and, you can't always be a nice guy if you want things to go right. I mean, and I'm not saying be mean and, break the law or anything, but sometimes you got to just plant your feet in the ground and withstand and also demand. There's a movie called Doubt with Meryl Streep. It's based on a stage play. It's about a nun pursuing a priest because she believes that he's a sexual predator. But she says something that this other nun character says, I feel, suspicion makes me feel less close to God. And Meryl Streep says, in the pursuit of justice, we take a step away from God. And in a way, you got to just keep your focus and realize that in the end, it is about justice and it doesn't matter what kind of craziness they drum up against somebody. If you know you're on the right path, then you just don't budge. Okay, I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk a little bit about this, because this article by the guy, Lipschitz is his last name here. I don't have his first name right in front of me, but it ends this way. Felix, okay. It ends this way. Far from infiltrating an Al-Qaeda cell to avert terrorism, the agency was seeking to influence and direct its activities in order to cause terrorism outside standard recruitment channels. Now, look, I want to just, because that's a very bold statement off of this. In your opinion, is that editorializing, or is that something we can say has substance from the revelations revealed in these documents?
I think that I think he's saying something which he's alleging is a correct interpretation of the documents. I haven't read through all the documents, but I will bring up something in terms of patterns of behavior or past actions regarding the USS Cole bombing in Yemen. And to say, I'll read, a senior Yemeni security official explained quote, that there was evidence that the U.S. itself was responsible for the explosion as part of a conspiracy to take control over the port of Aden. And the president of Yemen, in response to the bombing that happened back then in 2000, I think it was, said on national TV that the U.S. had plans to invade and occupy Aden after the bombing. And I mean, so people who are really deep into the bombing of the USS Cole say there's a lot of suspicious stuff around, who's involved in the bombing, and maybe it's again not, maybe it's something that's not as not what it seems to be. It involves CIA again. So same thing is said also about the bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. And I haven't gone really deep into some of those things, but again, if you have people that are, bombers in Tanzania and Yemeni and Yemen and Kenya, and some of these people seem to also have close connections with the FBI or the CIA or informants or, or military background that just happen to be in the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time to get caught. It just seems that there's a history with the agency, with the CIA and with the FBI. Herbert Hoover. We could go into a lot of stuff about bad behavior on the part of the FBI in the past and the CIA, Operation Mockingbird, stuff like that. So I think that we're not looking at squeaky clean agencies. And so the history, from reading the article, I wouldn't say that I know with a capital K that the hijackers were CIA agents, but I'd say, boy, that's a trail someone should look into deeper. And there should be people in the U.S. government who are lawmakers who want to ask some tough questions.
That actually leads right into my last question in our last couple of minutes. Perfectly, we didn't plan that. But yeah, you're right. J. Edgar Hoover is notorious in history. We got the FBI trying to blackmail Martin Luther King. I mean, there's some shady stuff that's not a conspiracy theory. It's right out there in public record. It's just, the mainstream media doesn't like to talk about it too much. But anyway, if there was a will within this U.S. government for some kind of accountability and getting down to the bottom of 9/11. Again, we're controlled demolition guys here at AE. This is kind of a rare thing where we step off into this aspect of 9/11. But what could be done by our elected representatives to find out more about this and get some questions answered by the people that were directing this Alec Station and telling their underlings to not cooperate fully?
Well, I guess they could, they've had, there's always special hearings about everything from as simple as, a house committee wants to investigate, bad messages in rock and roll and whether or not it's safe for young people, right? They'll have an investigation into that. So I think that they should have a special committee look into, Alec Station and all of this stuff, and bring people in the CIA forward. I understand, I'm sure that they'll have to have closed hearings at times because of certain people that have to speak, but that would be something that would be great to see. I don't know whether it would result in something similar to Watergate, but I think that there's an awful lot of hot potatoes, that need to be, looked at.
Well, at one point in our history, God, I can't remember, it might have been the 50s or something, they had a congressional hearing on comic books corrupting children. That's why for a long time, you used to see the comics code seal on comic books in the corner because of that, because of some book written by a German guy. And we've had hearings over the dumbest things in the 90s over lyrics and rap songs and such. You're right. And yet, to try to get any action on this very provable evidence when it comes to controlled demolition on 9/11 is an epic struggle. And when things even come out right in the news, it's almost like they just want to elude it. So I think they're wasting a lot of people's time on nothing burgers out there while ignoring the important things. Ray, thank you so much for coming on and discussing this with me and spending this time here. And how do we keep track of you if people want to find out more about your work and follow what you're doing?
Okay, sure. Probably the best way to follow me on Twitter, which is like the @ Ray McGinnis, RayMcGinnis, numeral 7. And I've got my focus on the 9/11 Commission for sure. And I've also I went in Canada, we had the Public Order Emergency Commission looking into the necessity of declaring a national emergency in the face of the protests in Canada in Ottawa last February, and so I will have a book coming out about my attending the Public Order Emergency Commission, and it's very interesting how commissions over the years, even going back to the Titanic, the U.S. investigators concluded that it was an act of God and no one could have done anything. So.
Very interesting, very interesting. Well, Ray, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Free Fall today.
Great to be with you. Take care.